just after the financial crisis, maybe somewhere there, and
No, is it down? Okay, hang on.
um, and at that time I had met many people in that conference, but I guess it was just a constant learning at the time. And then eventually I went to become a mufti, and that's where really my growth began, because in the mufti program, you literally wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you have like 5 hours of study and continuous research. It's like the work, the timings there are like literally ridiculous, the amount of work you have to do. And I was fortunate enough to, you could say, shadow my teacher, who was the Sharia advisor at FNB Bank, which is a South African bank. So I had the honor and the opportunity to visit those Sharia board meetings, uh, business arbitrations, research, reviewing contracts. So in that space, I think in that IFTA program, I got so much so much insight, so much access to the Islamic finance industry within that 1-2 years, and that really helped me in understanding a lot of what's happening in the industry. But then I think the greatest change in my life was, I think, 2013, and the change happened in Al Rayyan Bank. How bizarre is that, right? But it's in Leicester. There was a program just before Ramadan on zakat, and I met one gentleman there, and his name's Iqbal Naseem, right? So this is going back to 2013. And to be honest, I think that was the turning point for me to get into the Islamic finance industry. Because at that time, me and Iqbal both spoke on zakah. I spoke on Islamic finance and zakah, and he spoke more on zakah itself, because he is the CEO of National Zakah Foundation. He was invited by Al Rayyan Bank to speak. And we just kept in touch. And, maybe a couple of years down the line, Iqbal invited me to join the National Zakah Foundation. I think that is really for me, that kind of the springboard to the industry. So I think from all of this, what I would say is the greatest way is just keeping in touch with great people. That for me has worked, right? That is my life lesson. And I think I was fortunate in these last 2 decades to be with 2 people who I think are instrumental in my growth. One is my teacher in South Africa, which is Mufti Ibrahim Desai, and one is Iqbal Naseem. I think, till this day, he's my mentor, and I take so much pride in him being my mentor. I think those who know him can testify how amazing of a person he is, and how much learning and insight he brings to anybody. So I think that's really, I would say, for my study. So it's been like almost a 10-year studying, but then really being with people who understand the industry, being with people who are active in the industry, which really helped me. And then I would say, in terms of prerequisites, from a Sharia advisor perspective, what are the prerequisites? What do you need? There are different levels of Sharia advisors there, different types of Sharia advisors, those who have a more traditional route and those who have a more practitioner's route. Right? So the traditional route, there's different types of scholars in that whole league as well. Those who have trained in fatwa, those who haven't trained in fatwa. But what is common in all of them, I would say, is you need to have a strong understanding of fiqh al-mu'amalat, a very strong understanding. If you don't have that, you can't problem solve. I mean, the greatest element of a Sharia scholar is being able to problem solve in an authentic, logical, and efficient way. That's the key thing. Why does any kind of company, firm, financial institution want you? If you can problem solve, they want you to solve their problems that they're facing, and that goes across the board for any career that you're in, any kind of path you're working in. You need to be able to problem solve, and for a Sharia advisor, problem solving is probably the key, the essence of their job. But also problem solving within an authentic, logical, and efficient way. You can't problem solve and give an illogical response. It will not work, right? So that's, I think, the key when it comes to a prerequisite. But all of that, I would say, is I would like to highlight more of the, you could say, the underpinning or building blocks for a Sharia advisor. And I would say there are 3. There's like 3 foundations that you need, right? Which is, 1 is knowledge, 2nd is mentorship, and 3 is experience. A Sharia advisor, if you want to work in the Sharia advisory space, you need to have all 3, which is a really strong knowledge base. Number 2, mentorship. You need mentors, because this space is so dynamic, it's so fluid, it's just constantly evolving. And you need to have that kind of always have somebody that you can refer to, turn to, who's ahead of you, of course, and experience. The experience is key. I mean, a Sharia scholar who has experience working with, the latest products, latest deals, latest structures, his understanding of the entire sector will be miles ahead than majority of other scholars who are working in the space or who are just like talking about Islamic finance. So those, I think, in terms of answering the first two questions which Ibrahim had posed, which is personal journey and prerequisites, I would say that really highlights or gives a good summary of that. Ibrahim, you want to add a comment? No? Okay. Sorry, I can't hear you.
No comments. I was just turning on my video to let people know that I exist.
Oh, no, sure. And then I think the third question which Ibrahim has raised is about self-development. How do we develop ourselves as a Sharia advisor? If you want to go into the space, this is, again, whether you're in Sharia advisory, whether you're in accountancy, whether you are business management, the underlying principles are the same, right? And I would say that I would just put 3 words. If you want to just summarize in 3 words, I would say self-discipline. You have to be relentless, number 2. And number 3 is laser focus. Those are like my 3, I would say 3 words. That's self-discipline, number 1. Number 2 being relentless, right? And number 3 having laser focus. And I take great inspiration from Will Smith, right? Will Smith, if you have watched his motivational quotes, like there's a couple of quotes of his which really still stay in my mind. He says about himself, I've always considered myself to be just average talent. But what I have is a ridiculous, insane obsessiveness for practice and preparation. That's Will Smith talking about himself. And I think that really highlights what we need if we want to progress in anything. He says at another place by himself, he says, where I excel is ridiculous, sickening work ethic. Then he says, whilst the other guy is sleeping, I'm working. Right? And that's really the key. Self-development comes from this kind of discipline. You need self-discipline. You need to be able to meet your deadlines. If you have a deadline, meet your deadlines. You need to be able to wake up at the same time every single day. That's self-discipline. You need to be able to go to sleep every single day at the same time. You need to have this time management. Time management goes for every single career that you're in. If you don't have that basic building block, you will not progress anywhere. I can guarantee that. Right? So self-discipline is fundamental to your growth in any sector. Then being relentless, meaning having this sickening, obsessive work ethic. You can do your game, A game every single day. If you can't do your A game every single day, you are not achieving. You're not being productive. So having this, being at your A game every single day, is another quality. And finally, laser focus. Focus is extremely important. If you want to succeed in Islamic finance, you need laser focus. You can't afford to be distracted or have multiple things. You need focus. You want to develop yourself, right? So you need focus. And when you have these things, right, 9 out of 10, you need to put the effort. Then Allah will definitely see you doing that effort and put that 1/10 in, and that will tip the balance. Allah will be the one who activates, intervenes, who tips the balance from that 1/10. But 9/10 has to be from you. And that's what Sayyidina Umar said. Sayyidina Umar, he told a person once that, why are you sitting on the street just begging, asking Allah, for rizq, for sustenance? Because the sky, لا تمطر ذهبا ولا فضة. The sky doesn't rain down with gold or silver, right? You have to put the work ethic in, working. You have to be achieving your targets on a daily basis. And that's really, it's just like Allah will only select those people who have a good CV. This is the work, really, if you're serving Islamic finance or Islam, the Islamic economy, I would say, right? You're doing it with a good intention. So Allah will select those people who have a good intention to serve people. But your CV has to be right as well, because Allah is selecting people here. So if you don't have the CV, the skill set, you will not get far. It's just like the world. It's no different. Like how we take people on to do certain tasks. Same thing when it comes to these kinds of tasks and work. And I guess when it comes to career progression, Ibrahim asked the fourth question, which he posed to me was, how does a person go further in Islamic finance as a Sharia advisor from a career perspective. And how does a person be successful in this space? I guess, when we talk about what is success, right? We automatically see this 60-year-old person, of yourself, a 60-year-old version of yourself, who's really wealthy potentially. He's got, grandchildren running around him. He's living in, I don't know, a big mansion, and he's just living his best days of his life. But that's not how I define success. That's not success for me, right? That whole notion is very relative, and it's just like a bubble. For me, what success is executing your game plan every single day. That's success for me. If you execute your game plan every single day, you're successful now, period. Success is not 50 years down the line. It's not an abstract kind of phenomenon. Success is now and today. If you can execute today, you're successful because you're already on the path to success. So for you to be a successful advisor, Sharia advisor, an Islamic scholar who's working in the sector, you need to be able to execute a game plan daily. What does that mean? It means having deliverables. How much, every day are you growing in your knowledge? How many projects have you assisted in? How many products have you developed? How many creative ideas have you brought to the table? How many problems have you solved? These are your KPIs, right? These are the KPIs, not how much money you have. That's not a KPI. For us, that's not a KPI. But it's more about how much have you assisted? How much have you developed? How much have you secured? How many deals have you secured? How many people you've saved from riba? That's really the key one for us, right? Working in the Islamic economy. How many people have you converted from riba to Sharia finance? That's probably the basic KPI for you. So these are, I would say, career progression every single day. If you can map that and just do that every single day, you're successful now. There's no such thing as future success. That's just arbitrary, really arbitrary. It's really just an abstract notion. But success is today, and that's why Allah says in the Quran, "Qad aflaha man tazakka." And this is where I get this idea from. Because Allah says, "Indeed, successful is the one who tries to be pure." Tazakka means who tries his utmost to be purified himself. So just trying, Allah said, that is success. So just being on that path is success, and that's what it is. Same thing up here. And I would say that the fifth question Ibrahim posed to me was about the business of being an advisor, right? The business side of it, and the career. I mean, being a Sharia advisor, to be honest, I wouldn't say it's a full-time role unless you are working in a financial institution, right? Unless you are employed by a bank, you're a Sharia compliance officer, an internal Sharia compliance officer, or Sharia auditor, or you are part of a takaful firm, a Sharia advisor in a takaful firm, where you're employed full-time. Most Sharia advisors today are not full-time in the advisory space. And to be honest, the advisory space is extremely saturated, right? It's extremely saturated. And I say that with all honesty. It's, for every 100 or 200, there'll only be one that really makes it. That's, I would say. If you look at India and Pakistan is a great example where all the scholars are, graduating. They all have, they're all muftis. They all have great, Sharia knowledge. But there's just so much competition. It's literally, it's so tight, and very few people really get far. So, what will get you far?
Mufti Sahib, how do we cut through that? How do we make ourselves the ones who do get through?
Yeah, so that's, I mean, to be honest, it goes back to my 3 principles. If you have those in your life, I think you'll shine anywhere, which is self-discipline, relentlessness, being relentless, and having this laser focus. Because those 3 qualities underpin everything, right? If you have those 3, you'll always go ahead of everybody. You'll be ahead of the game because naturally you'll be able to maneuver yourself, you'll be dynamic, you'll be able to, see opportunities. And more than that, I think the next three things I'm saying is that that's more of you could say your foundation, your base. But how do you actually get there? I think you need 3 things. And the 3 things are the education, mentorship, and experience. Those 3 are key. So you need a very solid education because remember, Islamic finance for a Sharia advisor is a technical field, it's a technical skill set. You need to have technical knowledge and you need to be very, very thorough, very, deep and extremely, you could say, comprehensive in that. You need to have that base understanding. That's your foundation. Without that foundation, you're not going to climb the ladder at all. So that you need, number one, is a very, very strong foundation. And I would say at a fatwa level, you should be able to problem solve, because that fatwa training teaches you problem solving. I would say that's probably the best level to be at in terms of a Sharia advisor, where you're actually trained as a mufti giving fatwa. That, I think that is, and I'm just saying from my own experience, I found that to be the most, I'd say, beneficial as an individual for me in this path. I don't think I've found anything else more beneficial, because it's just unlocked the ability to problem solve. And that's what the world wants. What the world wants, what every market wants, what every industry wants, what every sector wants, what every CEO wants, is just for you to solve the problem. That's what people want, right? You solve my problem, I don't want to solve it myself. So if you can walk in and solve someone's problem today, they want to see what value do you add. People want value from you. People don't want to give you value. So if you can just communicate to somebody, look, I can solve your problem, I can add value to you and your business, they'll be your best friend tomorrow. It's as simple as that, right? So these three, I would say, are fundamental: education, mentorship, and experience. And when it comes to education, there's so many courses out there, so many different courses. All education is good. I will never ever put down a course. I've done a number of courses in Islamic finance. I've always benefited from every single course. So it's not about doing this course or that course. All courses are beneficial. But what I would say is, when it comes to education, the best course would be where you have obviously deep theory as well as the industry knowledge, right? That's, if you can get that mix and exposure to people in the sector, that'd be the best. And that's why I think the Majalla that we plan to do, this 2-year program, I think that's really good. We've tried to take the best of every single course out there. So we're trying to put the classical knowledge there. We're also putting in the industry practice out there. And at the same time, we're bringing in experts to lecture and be present in those gatherings, and having like an open session where people can raise questions. So it's just, I would say, the best of all worlds we're trying to merge into this 2-year program. And that's why I think it's that I'm really looking forward to this endeavor, and to be with all the different brothers and sisters who join this program. Jazakallah khair. And that's, I think that's enough from myself.
Brilliant. Jazakallah khair, Mufti Saab. I see that fantastic innovators teams where they allow hands up. So I see all people with their hands up. Inshallah, we'll turn to them in the Q&A section. Mufti Saab, that was really helpful. Jazakallah khair. Just before we started this real face of Sultan Chaudhry, and it was basically on infrared. Sultan Chaudhry on infrared is a very scary sight. That's what happens when stay in banking for that long. But alhamdulillah, he's in color. He's a much nicer figure to look at. Over to you, Sultan.
MashaAllah, I'm back from the dead. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulil kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and thank you to IFG and Mufti Faraz for his talk. And this is actually a topic it's very, very dear to me. I hope everybody can hear me. It's not too distorted. So inshallah, if it is, just shoot a message on the chat, and we'll see what we can do. But so I'd like to just follow the same format as Mufti Faraz, and just give you a little bit of background in terms of how I started out, and whether there's some insight there or not. But I think one of the things that Mufti Saab said is instructive, and it's not very helpful to you necessarily, but it's instructive in that, Allah puts you where you are. Yeah, if you go in with, if you're going in with the right intention, sometimes the opportunities open up for you, and you should pray for that as well. Yeah, if you are serious in your intent to move into this industry, to do something that is halal, worthwhile, changes your environment, your world, you have to pray for it as well, right? You have to ask for it. And so I'll give you just a little inkling into that. So I had a pretty, I would say, standard university education. I studied economics. At that time, and this is obviously going to date myself, in the early 90s, most of the text in the Islamic finance field was Islamic economics, quite high level, talking about a macro economy, and it'd be academics saying, if we did this, we just didn't have interest as a factor of production, because interest is the cost of capital, and we had this and that, and it was quite technical, it was written by economists. And I'd taken an interest at that time at university, but not necessarily following it through. I had an interest in it. And like a lot of students, I wasn't sure about what I wanted to do, I drifted into accountancy because, it's a good field. The big four accountants, the big six at the time, were recruiting the largest number of graduates of any kind of single profession, and I ended up in accounting. Qualified as a chartered accountant, worked hard, and many of the attributes needed for success are, independent of which industry you're in. So in many of the things that Mufti Saab said was, are applicable wherever you work, right? You've got to put in that dedication. Yeah, you have to work hard as well as be clever. There are clever people, bright people who don't get very far, so they don't match it with dedication and effort. And there are people who are all effort. They actually tend to go a bit further than people who are lazy. So obviously we make the dua to avoid laziness as well, right? It's a big it's a big curse on us in many ways. It's a big affliction. And I think it was really interesting to hear about your seminary and getting up at 4 a.m. and doing 5 hours, right? So 9 o'clock, it's an amazing feeling for those of you who've done it. It's 9 o'clock and you've already done 4 hours work. Yeah, and you have your day in front of you. That's a motivational boost. Mufti Faraz, and that's amazing to hear. And those of us who've done elements of that, if I get to 11 o'clock and I've done 5 hours work, I feel great, right? But 9 o'clock is even better, mashallah. But anyway, moving forward, how did I get into financial services? So as an accountant, you see lots of clients. I had and I was in audit and assurance. I did a little bit of work in corporate finance. So you see a lot of businesses. And actually, one of the businesses that interested me the most was an online stockbroker, but at that time, a telephony stockbroker. And I did a piece of work for them, a piece of consultancy, and they offered me a job, and they offered to pay for my MBA. So it was a great opportunity. I left the accountancy profession and joined this online stockbroker. And I guess, for a little bit, my Islamic finance interest was parked, albeit actually I do remember with friends from time to time writing little PowerPoint decks about how Islamic finance was being implemented in terms of home finance in America, which interestingly did it before the UK did it, right? And looking at some of the products out there, like the Munzil product, which Bank of Kuwait did. And so I'd maintained my interest, but it wasn't until, and this is what I mean about the opportunity, the invitation that you get from Allah. I actually went on my first Hajj in 2002. And it was a very, very difficult Hajj. It was a difficult Hajj. Most things that could go wrong went wrong. They lost our luggage. It had the medicine of my elderly uncle and my father. We didn't have even a bed sheet or any cover in Muzdalifah, and I had elderly people with me. The journey was difficult. Many, many things happened on that Hajj. But I remember having a dream during that Hajj, and I couldn't make much sense of that dream. But I remember a tall building, and there was a call center, and there were people who discernibly, you could say, were Muslim, working in that call center. And That's kind of all. That was this image, this very, very clear dream, right? And I'm somebody who doesn't dream very much, right? I very rarely dream in terms of what I can remember. I remember just talking to somebody about it, and actually this tough Hajj afterwards, one of the scholars who was consulted and saying, well, that actually was a cleansing of your sins. Mashallah, that was a good sign. And then I came back to work, and I was working in his stockbroker. I was doing various operational works. I was rising very quickly in that firm, through perseverance, hard work, and I'll come back to perseverance in a minute. But, and I got to the point where I was number 2 in that business. And then we were suddenly, just overnight, taken over by Barclays Bank. So I never chose to work in a bank. That's another thing, right? We were taken over by Barclays Bank. And they came in, they were doing their due diligence. They interviewed all the managers. I went through my areas of responsibility. They came back to me and said, well, look, we want you to stay on. We think you're doing a good job. And we actually want you to run, it was actually about 8 departments within Barclays Private Bank, as well as your current work at the stockbroker. So I took on that work. And that was my introduction, if you like, to practical banking. And it was although it was private banking, so there was an overlap with the stockbroking and investment work that I was doing. So that kind of was my first banking experience. It was conventional banking, and of course, whilst there was some
Mufti Saab, can you see Sultan, or has he paused for you as well?
It's frozen for me.
Frozen for me as well, yeah. Perhaps we give Sultan just a minute to rejoin. Just as the story was taking an interesting turn.
Exactly. It's left us all in suspense, right?
That's what bankers do, isn't it? When they're trying to close deals, they create this sense of excitement and intrepidation, get all the bids in.
Were you trying to do the same thing? Oh, he's back.
I got thrown off for some reason. It just suddenly said you've been kicked off. I don't know why. I'll just quickly resume the kind of long intro because
it's because Sultan, it was because you were saying that you worked for a bank.
Yeah, I know. No, that's right. So I'll tell you what happened one day. So I used to work very hard, inshallah, and I was working in London away from the family. My family live in Birmingham. And I was there working late one day. And whilst I wasn't in the finance department, the divisional account appeared before me. Somebody sent it on an email list. Can we get somebody onto mute? Somebody, I think, is got a bit of background noise. I don't know if everybody can just go onto mute. Thank you. And I was reading the accounts, and if you ever looked at a conventional set of banking accounts, you'll see it has interest-based income and non-interest-based income, right? And I was sitting at Barclays at that time in that division, and the interest-based income was 70% of the income of that division. Okay, and actually that could be considered relatively low, but it was because they had a lot of fees. But that was a real stark point. I'd been on the Hajj. I'm sitting there late at night. Most people had left the office, and there I'm staring at this stat, and I feel incredibly uncomfortable at that point. Incredibly uncomfortable. And then, I guess things suddenly came forward. We the ex-chairman of Barclays was used to know Eddie George, the Bank of England governor at the time, and he had been pushing Islamic finance at that time, right? And the chairman of, so we had written, and he was on some committee, and we wrote to the chairman, a friend and I, and we said, look, we want to get into Islamic finance. And then he sent us a note, and he said, look, there's an Islamic bank being formed by some venture capitalists from Bahrain. and you can send your CV, contact these guys. So we contacted these guys. They referred us to a recruitment agency, and I interviewed for the operations manager job and got the job. Now, one of the key, mashallah, one of the key things to highlight here, and it's a theme maybe that comes through with Mufti Faraz as well, there was a sacrifice involved. I took a positional cut, I went into a job from, if you like, being a senior manager, an executive, being number 2 in the firm I was before. And I took a positional cut to a level that maybe I could have worked in a few years back. And I also took a 45% salary cut. Okay. And, you know, sometimes if you want to achieve something, it's not just about hard work. You've got to make some clear decisions how much you want it. And that sacrifice can manifest itself in different ways. And in this case, the opportunity appeared to me, but to take that opportunity, I had to make a sacrifice, both taking on paper, a few steps back in my career in terms of position in job, and also in terms of salary. And again, everybody will be faced with some choices at some point in their life, and you have to make that decision. You know, are you going to pay more for something because it's right? You know, people always talk about it when they talk about, halal meat or whatever. Do you pay more for something that is healthier? You know, is organic food always a bit more expensive? It is, right? Because it has to reflect the costs of production. You have to make a sacrifice at some point. Alhamdulillah, that was my step on a journey into Islamic finance, my first step getting that job. To this day, I'm still involved. I am chairman of Islamic finance brokerage, Precept Finance. I work with IFG as well. I work to set up a waqf, and I'll come on to some of the kind of motivations for me there. Alhamdulillah, I got into this job, and it was setting up the operations of a bank. It allowed me to recruit people. It allowed me to design an Islamic banking system. At that time, there were no off-the-shelf Islamic banking systems. So we took a conventional one and converted it. I remember writing the chart of account. I remember doing the double entry processes. It was very, very detailed, and you had to have good technical skills. You had to be good at your job. And that's something that I want to address in prerequisites, right? You need to have skills that are sometimes more general than just Islamic finance, right? You need to have the aptitude for Islamic finance, the ability to learn it and want to learn it, but you've got to be good at some functional expertise. Now, that might be operational management, that might be accounting, that might be marketing, HR, but you can't, as Mufti Saab said, in terms of pure Islamic finance jobs, like pure jobs in terms of Sharia, built around the Sharia, they're very few and far between. Every bank might have one or two, and even some of those are part-time. So you must get a kind of generic skill base in a field, and choose your field and get that skill. So for me at that time, although I had an accounting background, I qualified as a chartered accountant, I had financial services operations. Now, I think last week you covered this, and it's a conundrum. How do you get the experience, right? You've got the skill, but how do you get some of that experience? Because if you look at a lot of the Islamic banks today, they go and hire people on the basis that they've got experience in banking, or they've got experience in financial services regulation, or whatever it is. But how do you get it if most of the jobs are not in Islamic finance? And I know it was covered last time, and the various schools of thought about whether you can work in a bank or not. And I suspect if I, had more knowledge at the time, I may not have chosen to even have that. It was only 11 months at Barclays. I probably would have walked out earlier. I would have probably not had the opportunity to open up the Islamic bank. So, we're on a journey. We don't know when the doors open up. But I think that the key thing for me, though, is that you as an individual, wherever you are in the journey, have to be authentic about believing that riba is prohibited and a great sin. It's not just convenient to put it aside for a bit, or something's more costly, or some sacrifice isn't worth taking. You need to have that, because then the barakah flows into all your actions. I really believe that. I've seen it with my own eyes, and it's a critical mindset, right? Now, it might be that you're in a position where you have to untangle your affairs, and you set off with that intention and you untangle it, and then you have a fresh slate. I think it's clear in the Quran, you'll have a fresh slate when that knowledge comes to you, when that awareness comes to you, and you want to move forward. So we pray that we get that fresh slate, that we're cleansed of it. But if somebody says to me, should I work in a conventional bank today, I tend to take the slightly more stricter definition, and not really, and it's unfortunately it's not a solution. But I think it's cleaner to stay away from haram income. And if you think about that example I gave, 70% of the income coming into that business that was funding my salary, even though I was doing operation, was from riba. So yeah, it's not necessarily a great solution for people. And I think we as an industry have to create that solution for people to get that experience without having to incur that experience of riba and the banks. And it's not just about that. Some of the culture that you will face, particularly at that time in the 90s, in those institutions, may put you in a position that makes you uncomfortable, whether that is being able to pray on time, whether that is peer pressure to join in activities that ultimately is not good for your deen. It's more than just riba. Yeah, there are other facets of work that can have a negative influence on you, and you need a very strong will and personality to be able to withstand that. And unfortunately, I've seen very motivated brothers and sisters. Sorry, hello, brothers and sisters leave university, end up in that city environment, and go off track. So you've got to make sure that you've built your own belief system, and it becomes a barrier for you. It becomes a protection for you, and it's really important. And it's not about being judgmental. I think everybody else is on a journey of untangling their affairs to make them correct. And it's really vital that we try as an industry to offer graduate schemes, internships. Alhamdulillah, there's a wider range of startups now. Many people at university, I know there was a survey I think done in Oxford University where before people would have an ambition to join an investment bank, the classic ambition, I join an investment bank, make a lot of money. People now aspire to join fintechs or new technology startups or Google. And so you can go straight from uni and start learning an industry that's going to disrupt the old status quo, disrupt the culture, the bad culture. There's a reason why banks were pillarized. It's the culture wasn't conducive to ethics, to integrity of character. And I think what you have to try and build when you get into an organization as a leader is that culture. It's very, very, very important. So unfortunately, what do Islamic finance institutions look for? And this is an endemic problem. We have to ensure that our Islamic finance institutions are full of people who actually believe in the products they're selling. They believe in the prohibition of riba. That it's not just a convenience. It's just a job for them. And when that happens, if I think back to the greatest success period of Al Rayan Bank, was when we had a large cadre of people who were doing it for the cause, for the purpose, for the legacy of having something available to people that was, in accordance with their faith. And when it becomes just a job, I think you find that the barakah is not as big. It doesn't achieve as much as it should. what example does it set if the management just see it as a product, and they're taking conventional because it's cheaper? And I really think that is a endemic problem. That I really encourage people to go to organizations where the people, the staff, the employees, the management, the shareholders are aligned, and they really believe in what they're selling. It's really, really important, and I think it shines through when it's not the case. The inconsistency, what we call the goal incongruence, shines through. And you know it when you speak to somebody who's just selling it as a product and not selling it with authenticity. So anyway, coming back to what Islamic finance institutions look for, if you want to go into finance and you're an accountant, you've got to try and get that experience and overlay it. Show them, look, I've got the minimum technical skills. Ideally, you've got more than the minimum, but more than that, I'm really motivated to work in Islamic finance. I've taken X courses. I've done this internship. I've worked for free. I've made sacrifices. I'm going to take the Majalla course with IFG and Mufti Faraz. I'm going to, take some other courses that are out there. If you can show that over and above the fact that you've got what I call the baseline, the technical skills, that's what we call the order qualifier. So the order qualifier is, what I mean by order qualifier, I'm the employer. I'm hiring you. That's an order, if you like, in business speak. The order qualifier is you've got to have the technical skills. The order winner, what's the winner? The winner is this guy's got the right attitude, and right. And I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to just flick through a couple more comments about moving up in your career. And it brings me back to this theme of sacrifice, of taking some sacrifice. Sacrifice and a long-term view. One of the issues I had with some of the people I was recruiting latterly at the bank, who were coming in at entry level, graduates coming into call center, for example, as a toehold into their job, I would find that they were very impatient to progress, which is good at one level. At another level, it was unrealistic because sacrifice and long-termism, and there's a lot of academic theory on this as well about gratification. Those people who can delay the need for reward by thinking more long-term, by making some sacrifice now, earlier on in their career, they get the benefit later. Classic example is, I think I remember when I left uni, I had 4 or 5 job offers. I picked the one that paid the lowest at the time. But why? Because it had the greatest scope for development, for learning. Because when you're in the early stages of your career, it's a bit like an investment cycle. Yeah. In the early years, you're investing, right? Then as you get into the mid cycle of your career, it's a balance between continuing to invest and getting some income, and then later you're actually reaping the reward of your investment. And obviously you're doing lifelong learning. So at the beginning of your career, make that sacrifice early, think long term, and start developing yourself. I think one of the other little tips is sometimes think about going horizontally, not always vertically. So don't always think I have to go up the ladder. Go and try another field. So I was in operations, I was in finance, I was an accountant. After 9 months at the Islamic Bank of Britain, I moved into sales. It's a scary place to go for an accountant or an ops person. It's riskier, it's more challenging. You face a lot of rejection, particularly at that time when Islamic banking was unheard of. And mashallah, I think if there's anything that developed me, it's certainly my soft skills and my resilience, it was moving to sales, because I would be pounding the streets of Britain, where it was Leicester or Tooting or Small Heath, and we'd be rejected 9 times out of 10. Oh, IBB, that sounds like BCCI. That was a bank, they were fraudsters. Or Islamic finance, profit is the same as interest. All the stuff that IFG do, I was facing, to my face 15 years ago. And one thing you learn, mashallah, is resilience and optimism. It's not for the faint-hearted. Yeah, you have to be. And sales gets a dirty word because people don't do it right. Sales is a great area to learn about yourself, to learn about your own character and your own resilience. Because when you get rejected, it brings you closer to a success. Statistically, it must do, right? Secondly, you have to have endless, boundless optimism, right? And that is, you've got to be a half glass, half full, half glass full person, rather than a half empty person. Really, you have to develop that positive outlook that things will be always better. That Allah will give you something better. You must develop that. And as you move up the organization, your soft skills become more important. Your leadership skills, your ability to motivate somebody is far more important than those old technical skills. You'll always have energetic young people who have that. And then I think that resilience, the other thing is perseverance. Very much like Mufti Faraz said, don't worry about a knockback. Just get up. Very hard to do, but you've got to have that ability to get up, that robustness. And so the final thing, I guess, to say is, how do you demonstrate that aptitude? Yeah, like I said earlier, you need to demonstrate it by showing you're doing more than somebody else. So, I'm not just plugging just the Majalla course, right? Which I think, but there are courses out there. You need to demonstrate that aptitude and say, yeah, I'm working somewhere which isn't directly Islamic finance today in marketing, but I've taken a course on the side. So when you do get that opportunity, and you pray for that opportunity, yeah, and you get that chance when it comes, and sometimes it will be dressed up in other ways. There'll be a sacrifice involved. You will have to take a pay cut, or you may have to take a positional cut, or you may have to move cities. MashaAllah, some of the Sharia advisors that joined our bank, they move cities, they move from countries, some moved countries, some moved from Liverpool or from London, they moved. What are you prepared to do for a halal income in the field that you're passionate about? Yeah. And then the final thing is, what's your motivation? For me, is it earning a huge amount of money, or is it about leaving a legacy? For me, it was about leaving a legacy. Making sure every day counts. And this at a practical level, because I think Mufti Faraz also gave some practical tips. One of the things I used to use is it's called GTD, Getting Things Done by Dave Allen. It's a fantastic way of developing focus. So, it's very practical. I would always recommend that as well to achieve maximum performance on a day-to-day basis. So happy to talk about that another time. So sorry, there was a whirlwind tour de force, Ibrahim. So apologies if I've eaten into time.
No, Jazakallah khair, Sultan. Pleasure as always. And I think for everyone on this webinar, I think you really can't get, I think, someone probably as experienced and as in the trenches as you've been, Sultan, over the last decade and a bit, because this has been it's the first Islamic bank, the first retail Islamic bank that the UK has seen, and the experiences that you've had will naturally be very relevant to this discussion. So, guys, I'm going to run through on my side the entrepreneurial aspects of the Islamic finance field and getting into it, and how you get a career started there. And I suppose the end point of it is essentially setting up your own thing in Islamic finance and how you go about doing that. So why don't I start by giving you a bit of a background into how I started. So I always wanted to get into Islamic finance as a kid, as a teenager, because I knew that there was, whenever there's something with word finance in the name, that there's money to be made. But at the same time, it's Islamic finance, so it's it's ethical. It's got my religion involved, and it made sense for me. And I started reading a lot more, and I read a book called "Who Runs This Place" by someone called Sampson, I think it was. Really good book, really recommend it. And I realized that everyone who'd run this place, a lot of them did PPE, and a lot of them did PPE at Oxford. So I said, all right, fine, let me try and do that. because we need Muslims to be, doing this sort of thing. So that's kind of where my motivations came from. The whole thing about Islamic finance for me was always about, how can I use this thing that Muslims have to create a better impact and create a better world for Muslims in particular, but also for the wider world. And throughout throughout my time at university, I was kind of working out exactly what that looks like. And, I like to, if someone asks me now, oh, what does Islamic Finance Guru do? What's the purpose and all that sort of thing? I can reel off an answer really easily. But at the time, you're kind of feeling it out. You broadly want to go in this area, you're interested in it, you're probably good at certain bits of it that you needed, but you're not really sure exactly how it's going to work out. And partly it's because you're not in the field, so you don't really have exposure to where the gaps are and what needs to be done. So what I did after university was I got my training contract with Ashurst, alhamdulillah, pretty much in the first month after I left uni. And I took a year out where I studied for my Dars Nizami course in Leicester, Sheikh Riyad Al-Hafs Darul Uloom. That's where I started. And I did a master's in Islamic banking and finance at the same time. And this is kind of echoing what I think Mufti Faraz and Sultan have been saying about how, it's a kind of, this was in 2013. We're now in 2020. It's a really long process of plugging away for a long period of time. And I did it because I genuinely believed in it. I was really interested in it. I was passionate about it. I didn't know that I was going to do IFG. IFG didn't exist at the time. And so I did my master's, I did my Dars Nizami, and then I did my training contract, my GDN and LPC, and then I did my training contract at Ashurst. And at the side, during this whole process, was when IFG started. So for those of you, if you go on the website now, it looks, alhamdulillah, much slicker than it did before. But if you go on the way back when website on the internet and you type in the IFG link, you'll see how ugly it used to look back in the day, because back in the day I was in charge of the design aspects, and believe you me, that was not a good look. In 2015 and 16 was when we started blogging, me and Mohsin on the side, just because we thought that there's stuff out there that is really advanced and written for academics, and there's stuff that's really basic and written for people who just want a halal or haram answer, but there's nothing really in the middle. And I want to explore this field myself. So I was essentially just sharing my own research in really layman's terms for people on the internet, and people seem to like it. At the same time, I was at Ashurst. I did dispute, I did financial regulatory services, I did banking and finance, I did funds formation, and then I moved to Debevoise once I qualified. So Debevoise is one of the, alhamdulillah, one of the top 3 private equity VC firms, law firms in the world. And I worked there for about a year and a half before I left to go on Islamic Finance Guru full time. And a part of this whole journey, I suppose, was getting IFG from just a blog to something that was actually, sustainable, and something that was actually, a startup. And it was actually in 2019, January 2019, so about a year and a half ago, when we decided to put IFG on a more commercial footing. And before then, for the three or so years before then, we had just been writing content and just been having a bit of fun, essentially. But it was in 2019, alongside our day jobs, that we started really pushing on IFG, and the traffic then really started picking up, and we saw things click, and we thought it would probably take about 2 years for us from that point to us quitting. But ultimately, it ended up that Mohsin quit within 9 months, and I quit within about, I think, 12 to 14 months. And now, alhamdulillah, we're full time on IFG. So that's kind of a potted history of how we got started. And I think that's really important to share, because I think that's, I would say this, I'm biased, but I think that's a risk-free or a relatively low-risk way of getting into entrepreneurship, where you're just stacking up the credentials and you're stacking up the experiences and you're stacking up the the networks and the backgrounds and everything that you need to do something, and then you time the leap at the right time, and then you go for it, because you don't want to leave it too late, because then you've got kids and you might have all sorts of other obligations, mortgages, and multiple issues going on. You don't want to leave it that late, and you lose hunger as well. But then you don't want to go necessarily too early. And my view is on the whole topic of should I go into the corporate world before going into Islamic finance or entrepreneurship? My view is that if you've got a really clear idea of what you want to do, then crack on and do it, and take a gap year after university if it is, or even during your early years of your corporate career. Take a gap year, have a go. If you've got a clear idea, if you've got a team that happens to just fall into place, ideally you have a bit of funding. See if it works. If it does work, then you'll be pretty sure of realizing you're onto something within a year. And if you are, then just carry on. But if you're not, then you've not really risked anything by losing a year, and probably you've gained a hell of a lot of real life experience. So that's my view on someone who wants to do it before they get into the corporate world. But my personal view is if you're not really sure about what you're up to and what you want to do, then go into the corporate world. And this was the same advice that I got from Sufyan Ismail, who's the founder of Mend, very, very successful entrepreneur and philanthropist. And we've had an interview with him on our podcast as well on YouTube. And his advice to me was very much, go into the corporate world, do a few years, do your time. It'll iron out all sorts of kinks, and then you go into entrepreneurship. And I can definitely say that a lot of the stuff that we do at Islamic Finance Guru has been really materially helped by doing that corporate time. I mean, for a start, I'm someone who doesn't have massive attention to detail. But because I was in the corporate world and I was a lawyer, I was essentially forced into, getting that up to scratch, and that really helped. The other areas, from a practical perspective, I had no idea how a fund works or how venture funds work, anything like that. But then when you work in that area, you realize how exactly they work intimately, and that experience is just invaluable. And then, of course, if you have a skill like, Sultan has an accountancy background, Mufti Faraz has a consultancy and, fiqh background, and I've got a legal background. At IFG, any legal work that comes up, it will, alhamdulillah, we can cover that, and you save a lot of costs as well. Diligent advocate. Ibrahim, your advice will deter a lot of people. Many people have and will find it difficult to gain entry into the corporate world. Extremely difficult. How many Muslims gain TCs at the firms you're talking about? Not many, you're right. And I'm not saying that this is 100% the route that you have to go, or that you have to go for the absolute best firms possible. What I'm saying is that I think that gaining real life corporate experience, it doesn't have to be at Goldman Sachs or McKinsey. And I can reel off places where I've been rejected as well, by the way. Everyone who is who's got ahead in their career has ultimately been rejected by a ton of places. So, there's always going to be hard knocks, and I think we just have to give it a go. And if it doesn't work, then, we iterate and work out other ways of doing the same thing. I'm just conscious of the time, so I want to really rattle through the rest because I want to get to the Q&As. So what is an Islamic fintech? An Islamic fintech is something that uses principles of Islamic finance and investment. So, for example, Minted is a new startup which does investing into gold, and they're using a technical interface to bring that up to the 21st century. So it's using, or Yielders, for example, uses, Musharaka principles, a little bit of Wakala principles, agency and partnership, and then it applies that into a modern context. And creates a structure that works. They typically will use technology in an innovative way. So people like Gordos, or you've got a whole range of Islamic neobanks now coming along, Kestrel, Rizq, Nia, Insha, etc. They use technology to great advantage to do something that was historically something that was done by someone else offline. So, for example, if you use Wahid, you're able to invest your money very, very quickly. But if you did it via, 10 years ago or 15 years ago via a financial advisor, it would take a lot more time. It will potentially take days and days of work for you to actually be able to invest. So a startup, an Islamic fintech startup in particular, tries to reduce that friction. It reduces the cost. It reduces the inefficiency of something that already exists. And if you're able to cut time, if you're able to cut costs, and if you're able to deliver something that's better, three key things: time, costs, and quality of the product, and ideally all three things, then you're onto a winner, because that's what things that people will pay for. What are the ingredients of a successful Islamic fintech startup? So part of what we do at IFG is we have an angel syndicate which sees dozens and dozens of startups every month, and we get through that a really good understanding of what startups are up to, and what ultimately gets funded, what doesn't get funded, and that sort of thing. The absolutely key thing is always the team. Because they're the ones who will remain constant. The product, it might not work, but the team will always stay there. And if you've got a great team, they will take a rubbish product and make it into something that will work. But if you've got a rubbish team, they will get a great product and they won't even make that work. So the team is crucial. What we're looking for in a team, and what is a successful team in my view, it's one that has domain expertise. So in Islamic finance, I would really like someone to have Islamic finance qualifications, ideally. If not, they should have relevant commercial and mainstream experience. So if they're doing something in property, it would be great if they have property experience. If they're doing something in investment, they should have investment experience. And then wider than that, I think things that Sultan and Mufti Faraz have said as well, such as tenacity and real grit and sticking at it, but also a track record of success. I think that is really speaks volumes, particularly when it comes to investment and investors, because if someone has done something like 3 previous things where they stuck at it for 5 years and taken something from scratch to something really successful, then that person has that in him to be able to do that again. So, for example, Mufti Faraz has built up from scratch a great consultancy operation for Amana Consultancy. Sultan has created an Islamic bank which has over 6 billion of assets. Now, if that's why people like Sultan and Mufti Faraz are people who people turn to, because they know that to have their experience and expertise will be really beneficial for various other areas, because they have that kind of that track record. The other key thing is right place, right time. So people like Netflix they've been around for decades, but they only really became successful when the right technology and the right data and internet caught up to be able to make that work. Facebook wasn't the first social media either. Then you've got good networks, good support networks, good investors, good advisors. All of these things are really crucial. And there's so much to be said here about how exactly you go about doing all this stuff. But sadly, we just don't have the time to do that. Inshallah, maybe we might do a course at some point just to run through all these things. Another ingredient is speed. So all things else being equal, the faster startup will typically succeed. And it's such an easy thing to say, but so few people have speed, particularly in the Muslim sector, I find. If you just have that speed, if every time you think about, I need to do something, and then you put like 4 obstacles up, or before that I need to do this, this, and this, and this, then you're probably one of those people who really needs to think about, do I really need to do those 4 things before this, or is there a way I can just get started and then sort those 4 things out afterwards? And then finally, attention to detail and quality. I know those things might seem like a juxtaposition, but believe you me, they're not. I think that you can have great speed and you can execute at great quality as well, and have great attention to detail. You don't necessarily have to be 100% every time. That's fine, because that's where you get the speed from. But I don't think you should be settling for 75%. I think you should be settling for at least 90, 95% of the quality that you'd want. Then in terms of, how does one actually get started on this? And this is really the final thing from my side before we get into the Q&As. I think if you're an entrepreneur, you'll really probably know it within you that there's always this bug within you that you want to get something started. The first thing you should look to do is build a team, because that is the most important thing in a startup. And it's always difficult to give away equity, right? But the problem is, if it's an idea in your head, yes, you are 100% owner of that idea, but because it's just an idea in your head, it's worthless. So you need to build a team and look for people with complementary skills. And a team of between 2 and 4 is a great team to have. 2 and 3 is the kind of the sweet spot as VCs typically think about it. So build that team. Then have a think about an idea, something that you're good at, that you're interested in, and that there is a real need for in the world, right? Those 3 things. Don't do something that you want to work on, but there's not a need for, or do something for a year and you're not really tested if people actually want it. Do something that has all those 3 things. You're interested in it, you're good at it, and there is a real need for that thing. Then you might want to think about getting funded. If that is the case, then there's a whole range of venture funds out there these days that you can turn to. IFG has the Angel Syndicate. We're always interested in receiving pitches for startups. And that also helps, I think, with your networks as well when you get the funding in from whomever you've got it, because they will come with a lot of doors that they can open. I think that's great. And if you have an Islamic finance startup, like if I was to start again, I would want to make sure that I have really good grounding in Islamic finance. If I'm doing an Islamic finance startup, I need to have grounding in Islamic finance, and I need to have it not just because it's a tick box, because I need to have it, and I need to have it not just because it's a great way to get a captive audience who are constrained by Sharia compliance. And I don't think of, and I'm not just thinking about Islamic finance education or knowledge or experience as a necessary evil. I would think of it as a younger me as something that is absolutely crucial for me to be able to present this great thing that is Islamic finance, because we're Muslims, right? We believe that this is the thing that is a better form of finance for the world, and finance right now is broken, and we want to solve that. But if we are just going to solve that by being cogs in the wheel of Islamic finance, then that's fine, but it's not going to be as impactful as someone who has that education and that experience and that background to be able to then really start thinking about innovating and coming up with new structures and coming up with new solutions. But you can only do that if you have that grounding. And so I suppose this is where I have to do the IFG is a startup, right? So we have to do the plug for the course as well. So Mufti Faraz is inshallah going to be leading a course starting next month. This is obviously the masterclass series that you're all part of today is the first thing that we've done with Mufti Faraz, and alhamdulillah we've had hundreds and hundreds of people who've signed up and expressed an interest on this. But the next thing that we want to do is a very selfish thing, frankly, for me, which is that I want to further my Islamic education, Islamic finance education in particular. And I want to do it. And obviously I've been through Dars Nizami, I've been through the mainstream education system. And I know that what I want is that Dars Nizami curriculum, but delivered by someone who actually lives in the real world and has experience of dealing with actual fintechs. And then at the same time, I know that someone like Mufti Faraz, well, he's great, and he would be the person I turn to. He doesn't have what Sultan has in his head about how, I don't know, like Salam Insurance, how that collapsed, and how that has a bearing on what we're discussing in the class. Or someone like Muhammad Baracha, who's the partner at Norton Rose, who's advising the governments in that area on developing a legal system, a legal code for Islamic finance to be used as a basis for various transactions in that area. Someone like him will just add a different perspective that I don't have. And then inshallah, we'll get other scholars who've advised on a various range of transactions. I'll try and rope in someone from a regulatory perspective, from a central banking perspective. So when you finish this course after 2 years, you walk away with such a good grounding. I walk away, this is for me really, I walk away with such a good grounding in Islamic finance that I can, really come up with innovative solutions and ideas that will genuinely help the world. So that's kind of where the thinking behind this whole course came from. The AAOIFE, alhamdulillah, have CPD certified the course, and we will potentially get some discounts on some of their programs as well. And skip, if you go for their kind of advanced qualifications, you can skip some of the modules as well, inshallah. And you will also be all added into a WhatsApp group so that you can, network and ping over ideas and thoughts and questions and get that going. And then we're also going to have a practical aspect to the course as well, where you have, and this is something I'll be discussing actually with Mufti Faraz at the moment, but we're going to have a project where you take the theory and apply it into a real life scenario for a bit of a test drive, and get Mufti Faraz and potentially myself and maybe others to review that and give you, their feedback and give you a mark essentially to get your Ijazah certification. And then we're also thinking about having some sort of, other classes and potentially like debate exercises and that sort of thing. So I would say this is, I'm just seeing some of the questions. You don't need to have any Arabic. You don't need to know any, any prior qualifications. This is literally starting from scratch in English, taking you to probably just below like advanced level. I'd say it will take you well beyond beginner. It will take you well probably beyond moderate. I think you'd be someone just on a kind of advanced level. And then you can, inshallah, you can carry on with your education after that as well. So that's it from my side. Perhaps, I don't know, Sultan or Mufti Faraz, if you want to come back online and we can pick through some of these questions together. Sorry, I'm just loading up these questions because so many that the computer slowed down. The people who had their hands up, do you want to take a moment here to, maybe about 30 seconds, put your question to the panel?
Yes, please, if possible.
Yeah, go for it. Okay, let's continue. First question. So what I'll do is I'll probably skip over the questions that are fiqh related or pure banking related. You can inshallah ask those on the forum.islamicfinanceguru.com, or you can drop us a line and we can point you in the right direction. So the first question is, to work at a good level in Islamic finance, do you have to know Arabic, be an alim, as well as conventional degree in economics, finance, and banking? Perhaps Mufti Faraz, do you want to take that?
Yeah, then I'll pass it over to Sultan, right? From my experience, you don't really need, I mean, as Sultan said, Islamic finance is such a wide spectrum. There's so many areas you can work in the industry. So whichever area you're working in, you just need specialism in that area, really.
How about you, Sultan?
I think Sultan, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
No, we can, yeah.
Yeah.
You hear me? Okay. Yeah, Jazakallah. Look, what I would say on that is that it's just like any job. Your degree isn't necessarily indicative of what career you end up on, providing you obtain that knowledge in some way. So it might be in most accountants don't have an accountancy degree, right? They might come from English or mechanical engineering or whatever, right? So it's actually it's useful to have an understanding of finance generally, the world of economics, but it's not fundamental to have a finance or economics degree is what I'm saying. You can pick up that knowledge in other ways, through courses, through a professional certification. So that's my simple answer on that.
Brilliant. Jazakallah khair. There's a question by Tahir, which is, what's a good area to look into in the Islamic finance arena for someone who's a qualified accountant from a corporate background, as well as a final year alim on the alim course, as well as working full time currently?
Yeah, so I think he's somebody combines me and Mufti Faraz by the sounds of it. Yeah. I would say actually go into it, join the finance department of an Islamic finance institution, because there's a requirement to understand how products are accounted for. There's similarities and differences. There's like kind of the AOFI accounting rules versus the IFRS rules, and actually, there are some differences, and providing you've got that, if you've got that fiqh background and you're a professional accountant, I think you're actually very well placed to add a lot of value there.
Mufti Saab, do you have any thoughts to add?
No, I think that's completely what Sultan said. Is great.
Brilliant. So Sufyan is asking, what key indicators for determining the right time to take the leap from the corporate world to the entrepreneurship when already having an already ongoing project like you had with IFG? Yeah, great question. So I think this is, ask us in about a year or two, we might give you a different answer. But I think there's a kind of few key ingredients. One is that you set yourself some key KPIs, key performance indicators, to say, okay, if we're hitting those kind of numbers, then we know that there's something going on here, and it is worthwhile for us to take the leap. Like, Sultan, you took a massive wage cut. I was trying to work out what my percentage was. It was like something like 2/3, because we're sadly a startup, so we probably couldn't even pay as much as Rayan. So it comes with a lot of cost. So you want to make sure that you time it correctly. And I think the few things that de-risk it are, firstly, show that you are growing month on month on whatever KPI that you set. For us, it was users that come to the website, and also revenue, and showing that is growing. The other area is you want to ideally raise some money, because that significantly de-risks the whole venture, right, for you as an individual. So you should do that. But the thing is, it's a catch-22, because you're not going to raise any money unless you have something to show in the first place. So you need that kind of initial traction to be able to raise money to be able to carry on. So don't try and raise that money to kind of get around the issue of getting traction. Traction is the key thing. And then I think you get that sense where you think the train is leaving the station now, and if I'm not on it, then it's going to be too late. If you're getting that sense, then it's probably a good time. If you're getting the sense that you are literally unable to cope by doing 2 jobs at the same time, that's probably a good time to leave. Because if you're not keeping yourself occupied enough where it is literally now like another job, then you probably are not at the level yet where it makes sense for you to quit. But by the time that we quit, it was very much like that. I remember there used to be times when I was on the tube with 2 phones, both on mute, and me listening to a call, at work, and me listening to another call where Mohsin was leading it. And that was like a classic kind of epitome of having 2 jobs at once. So I think that's another really good indicator of when to quit. And then what else have we got? Would banks like Al Rayan treat repossessions differently compared to conventional banks? Maybe a more lenient process. I'm asking unless you have a glib answer to it.
I'll give you a very, very quick answer. There's so just when we started out, Islamic banks are meant to show that if you like that some mercy, if you want to call it that, some understanding of a person's position, and not to take advantage of that. But as it happens, and the Islamic finance industry is ahead of the regulations in this sense, the forbearance regulations came out anyway, which forces banks to sit with their client, look, is there other ways to restructure your payments, give them time to sell the property and find a house before their equity diminishes too much. So actually, it's got to the point where whether you're an Islamic bank or the regulations, if it's regulations, it's about the same. The only difference I would say is somebody forcing you to do it, like in a conventional bank, they've had to change their attitude, or an Islamic bank because it's about our values, that we do it because it's right to do it, yeah, in terms of giving that opportunity prior to repossession. Now, in the end, if somebody can't legitimately pay, or in the long term can't pay for their obligations, for their debts, their obligations, whether that's rent or whatever, then ultimately then they need to be moving on from that property and getting something more in accordance with their means. And hopefully we avoid repossession, that we just give them the time to sell the property and move on. But ultimately the repossession option is still there, and it's allowed.
Jazakallah khair. Then I think the next question is, can you suggest helpful organizations register starters with internships? So, I mean, IFG is. I'll let others.
Sorry, didn't hear you there, Ibrahim, but I heard internships, and yeah. So you know what we used to do? There was two levels of internship. There were people who were taking a sandwich year, and we would just put them into a department. Whether that was a sales support function, or in operations, or finance, and they would work for most of a year in that department. They'd learn about just working in a corporate environment. A, that's one of the key benefits, and B, actually, if they showed a real strong aptitude for it, they'd go back, finish their degree, and then because they were good, we'd hire them again. Now, you've got to be prepared to think about starting in a non-graduate position, unfortunately, because of a limited number of opportunities. But when I look at the bank I was at, I remember somebody joined as a cashier and went on to be an area manager. Somebody joined in the call center, became the head of regulatory reporting. Yeah, because they had the inherent skills. They made that sacrifice. I don't know, joining a call center, joining as a junior in finance. And that's, that metaphor about, cream rising to the top or talent rising. It's very true. It's very true. They will get the opportunity after a period of time. Most companies will look more favorably on internal candidates. So you can progress, but sometimes you've got to take a risk and get that toehold in to the organization.
Well, definitely. Like, just to give you an example of, without naming names, but some members of our team historically have the way that it started is, they've just said, look, I've done this myself at times, where I've just said, look, I will literally just come in and work for free, and just be super keen and just add a ton of value to that company or organization or entity, and then that will then turn into a job, because people really value that. Anything to add, Mufti Faraz?
No.
I should point out that all startups require funding, absolutely 100%.
Ibrahim, I can't hear you. I'm not sure about anybody else. But...
I can't hear either. There's another question that I think maybe we can just tackle it. It's just person
Yeah,
asking. I
sure.
finished studies on a management bachelor degree and MBA finance, but unfortunately in my country there is no Islamic banks, no Islamic institutions. I've done myself Islamic finance and banking research. I find it very difficult to get into the Islamic finance industry. What are your suggestions? I mean, I just go back to what Sultan was saying about sacrifice and having to move. The world's a globalized place, right? You don't have to be in the same country many a time, depending on what you do. If you're so passionate about this and want to get into the industry, you might think about relocating altogether. I mean, Sultan, any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there will obviously be personal circumstances which either facilitate or not, and that, I guess, determines the level of sacrifice. One of the things you can look at in this modern world, alhamdulillah, is the ability to disrupt. You know, the costs and the barriers to entry have come down, and I would say match up your kind of your MBA and the skills that you were talking about with something that could operate in the entrepreneurial space. So we talked about fintech. Actually, the barriers to entry in fintech are much lower. So go and learn about digital marketing. Go and learn about putting together an architecture of existing technologies, right? Because you don't actually have to build everything or develop everything anymore. Sometimes it's just putting customer experience onto things. And so there are other options. All of them involve sacrifice. All of them involve risk. Yeah, that goes without saying. And then you have to make that call. But depending on which area you want to get into, you have to determine that level, that type of sacrifice.
I think there's another question which is more Al Rayan Bank related. I don't know if you want to answer. It says, how did the takeover of Al Rayan Bank change the organization from IBB?
It's a good question. We probably need to do another session on that. But very quickly, there was a time when IBB was, after the last financial crash, was probably in a very difficult position. And this is what I was talking about: belief and perseverance. I never stopped believing for a second that there wasn't a need for and a strong business case for an Islamic bank in the UK. That Al Rayan came in and essentially put in some money to make that a reality. And it would have been a lot slower, I guess, growth without them coming in and supporting that financial requirement. Because unfortunately in banking, the regulations mean that compared to, say, a fintech or not having a deposit license, you need quite a lot of capital at a certain point in time, to fund that growth. And I had it's a bit like designing a car, but actually you then need the resources to build it, right? Yeah. So you can build it, and you might only have enough fuel in the tank to take it 10 miles. Somebody comes along and says, actually, I want to fill up your tank, and you can drive 300 miles. Right, and that's how I liken it. Yeah, we had the ideas, we knew what we needed to do, but actually we needed more fuel in the tank, and I think that was key. Obviously, the rebrand made it a bit more accessible as well beyond the Muslim market, and I think that was actually another piece of work that we did, and we can talk about that. That's probably a case study in itself.
Okay. There's one more question. I think probably this one for myself is. As someone with more experience in sales and marketing within financial services, would the Majalla course do a comparison of practice and theory of conventional practice versus Islamic finance equivalent? I mean, the Majalla course, the way I really want to build the students up, and that's the IFG kind of vision as well here, where we discuss what the scholars have said classically, lay out everything, discuss the rationale as well. I just don't want to say, okay, this scholar said this scholar, no. But why are they saying what they're saying? What's the holistic framework? What's the vision behind the scholars? What's driving them to that conclusion? Understand the rationale, underpinning principles, and then see how that has translated into contemporary practice, and then see how contemporary practice is being integrated within the larger framework of regulation, of law, of banking practice, all these different things, like realities. Sometimes it's happened with me where if all the fiqh is correct, the legal contracts are fine, but because of a certain platform you're using and their regulation or the FCA kind of requirements, you can't just structure the deal in that way. You have to change the entire thing. So you start again from scratch and go up again. So all these kinds of different elements, how they interact, engage, merge. So we're talking about the theory, the practice, implementation, and then really seeing how all of that comes together. And so that's really the, I guess, the course in a nutshell, with all these different experts who will be there and who will be lecturing and giving their insights. I think the last question is just to end off the session is, Sultan, for yourself, the person's asking, would you recommend doing a CFA for going into Islamic finance? That's a heavy one, right? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think my computer's a bit frozen. I don't know if people can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I would say do any professional qualification that will assist in some aspect of what you ultimately do from a functional perspective. So, you know, it might be CMAP if you are going into home finance sales. Actually, you'll learn a lot of general good stuff anyway from a product perspective. If you're going to go into investments, CFA is obviously, you know, is also going to be very, very useful, because some of the principles are the same, you know, like risk reward analysis, knowing the universe of options out there. You know, obviously, it doesn't take away the necessity of learning about Islamic finance, by the way, but it's very, very useful to understand the market or a discipline that you're going into, but you've still got to top and tail it with something on Islamic finance. You must do, because otherwise you see classic mistakes internally. Again, you know, maybe we'll cover it on the big course someday, that some practitioners take one or two principles and think then they can just mimic conventional, right? It's not as simple as that, right? And so I do urge people to also understand the contractual nature, the fiqh of, you know, the elements of fiqh mu'amalat that relate to Islamic finance, because you won't make those mistakes, right? It is simply not a rebadge. People kind of allege that, and, you know, kind of say to practitioners it's the same. And actually, it can be the same unless you have the knowledge to disprove that, right? To show them that it isn't the same, both in substance and in form. And you need to have that knowledge. So yeah, do CFA, but you must also learn about Islamic finance. So do both is the short answer, right?
I guess that brings us to the end of the session. Just like to say Jazakallah khair to everyone for joining today. It was really insightful. And Jazakallah khair, Sultan, for being with us as well. We've really benefited from your insights and your knowledge and experience. And inshallah, we look forward to doing this in the future again.
Yeah,
Jazakallah khair to you as well, Mufti Saab. As ever. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.